pages. All right, welcome to another edition of the Subseasonal Forecast Contest. Zach Magis, student forecaster here, has volunteered to lead today's meeting. So I'm going to share my screen with Zach, and Zach's going to get us going. You should be able to share it now on your end. Good.
All right, hi everybody. Just a tentative agenda for what we're going to go over today. First 10 minutes or so, we'll do some forecast attribution, and then we'll go around and each of us will share our forecasts for this week, and then afterwards we can just have a discussion on anything we see in for this forecast period or anything we saw previously, and then I think we might talk a little bit about Michael's research. So let's get going here. So right now I'm looking at the cooling season standings at the moment. For people who have made a consistent number of forecasts, I mean, it's been the trend for the entire summer, basically. The 10-year normal with 19 forecasts has been pretty consistent. I'm there with 10 above the 10-year, but I mean, I haven't made as many forecasts, so who knows. Dr. Decker has done considerably well with 15 forecasts. Philip Ye has done really well. Consensus has been pretty strong. Dave has done really well. It's been the summer, I feel everyone has done pretty well. So if you look at 90 days, again, for the consistent number of forecasts, the 10-year normal has actually been the best in the last 90 days, then Dr. Decker, then myself, consensus, Luke LaBelle with 6 forecasts, Dave with 15. And then in the last 30, I believe Philip has been the best performer. So yeah, Philip and Dr. Decker neck and neck right there, 3 forecasts in the last 30 days. And then there's myself, the 10-year, and Dave. So again, for those who have been performing consistently, I'm sure everybody has found that the summer has been a pretty successful period for all of us. So now to talk about the most recent verification, forecast mark date 9/10, verified for September 25th to 29th. We had a first for this period. Everybody, every input, every human input had a positive score. Yeah. Granted, the CFS had a CRPS score of 1.3, so it's not a significant positive score, but I looked back and checked, and this is the first time that every input of ours has had a positive score. So I found that pretty interesting. So then I went back and looked, and I found that for the forecasts, the 6/18 forecast, the 6/25 forecast, and the 7/2 forecast, every input except for the CFS had a positive score. But then if you go back and look, the next week, 7/9, was that week where everybody did poorly. So if you look at those 3 dates, those were when we were forecasting for that July period where it was incredibly hot, and then that 7/9 forecast where that transition period happened and we all busted. And then there was another period, 7/30, where everybody except for the CFS was positive. And then for the last 4 weeks, basically everybody has been doing positively. And then including this week where the CFS had done positively as well. So 8/27, 9/3, and 9/10 everyone had positive scores. So my open question for everybody is, do we think, based on what we saw at the end of June and in July, do we think that transition is coming where all of our forecasts are going to bust? I don't really know. Again, we can talk about it, but the sample size is small, but it seems like about 3 or 4 forecasts where the verification is a lot warmer than everyone else, and then there's a period where everyone busts. So does anyone have any thoughts about that?
I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. I don't know if this really answers any questions, but it's kind of interesting that on a week when everyone had a positive score, the closest score was the EC, but it was still 10 points too cold, or 10 CDDs too cold. So it's just kind of interesting that in spite of all the forecasts being essentially nowhere near the verification that everyone got a positive score still.
Right, and that's because we benchmark to the 30-year normal, and so the 30-year normal, yeah, was way too cool, right? But you bring up a good point there too. Not to get off Zach's question, but the expression "it's all relative." Relative to the 30-year, we did well,
Mm-hmm.
but some could argue, and it's something we could look into for next summer, I guess. Should we use a different benchmark than the 30-year? Is it quote unquote too easy? But that being said, you know, when I look back at maybe Zach, you pull it up, looking back to the cooling season 2019, and it's not everyone has done better than the 30-year in terms of forecasts. Who have forecasters who participated, let's say, at least 50% of the time. I mean, you look at the zero number, and you see some, the industry and CFS and the ECMWF and stuff like that. So, not a slam dunk. Anyway, but I think it is something to think about there, and it is all relative, I guess.
And I'll just add in to kind of answer Zach's question. If there is going to be a forecast bust, and I'm always nervous about these things, but I would say the most recent forecast we just did, the one today, has the best chance because I'm, just looking at the numbers. We've got, I saw Paul Rundy is at 60. I think there's industries at 34. A couple of people in the low 40s. Luke is 39. A couple of people in the mid 40s, like Phil, and then I guess Zach's in the mid 40s as well. So there's a big range, and looking, I didn't really. It seemed kind of like a could go either way kind of period because I've read things that say we could be in a cooler pattern. The CPC, and I'm not going to get too deep into what they say, but because spoilers for the forecast, but there's things that indicate warmth, things that cool, and it seems like this. If there's going to be a bust week in the past couple of weeks, I think this one has the chance to be it.
Yeah. I have a thought on that too, but just one more comment to sort of what Zach when Zach was talking about the 3 weeks in a row. One other observation I made was I think this is the third week in a row too, where the verification has been outside the envelope of all the forecasts.
Yes.
Warmer. And so this goes back to actually Michael's point about how 3 weeks in a row where none of our forecasts, including all the automated, dynamic forecasts, caught the scope of the warmth. And I think that's not good, right? I mean, come on, no matter how you'd like to think that after 3 weeks, we would have had one forecast that could have tried to resolve or capture that. And I think that's a whole separate interesting research question. Why has this been going on for 3 or whatever weeks in a row?
Yeah.
But back to what Zach's question too. My first thought is to answer it sort of in a research type question, or answer his question with sort of a research type question, which is, this is a question that's been around for a long time, and I don't think there's a good answer, great answers for it, which is to say, how do the models perform during pattern transitions, right? It would be great if we could have something to answer that question right now, like where we could look at and say, oh, okay, here are the last 10 pattern transitions from the last, or whatever, 2 years or 5 years or 6 months. Here are the pattern transitions cold, here are the warm, and here's how the model performed, and here's how the models performed compared to, say, all other performance. So at least we'd have some relative benchmarks to say, hey, how do the models historically perform? I think there's a rule of thumb that if you ask like a pool of forecasters, that they'll say models don't handle pattern transitions well. But I think that's a very debatable question, and I think the hard numbers and facts would certainly help with that answer, a better providing better color around that question, because there's another school of thought, I think, which says pattern transitions occur sometimes when there's really strong signals for them. In other words, there's a big MJO event. And so models can resolve those big signals better. So they actually can capture a shift from warm to cold if there's a big pattern driver. So I think it's very mixed and very messy, but I think it could be very interesting to try to do some study to look at, say, the last X number from the last number of years, even if it's 1 year, but more data is always better. And just to answer that question, provide at least some color around that question. Obviously, I mean, Zach, you did mention, though, the couple events from the summer, and we did not do well, right? A lot of the models did not do well. So we do have that as a data point. I don't think, getting more into my 2 cents in terms of what's going to happen this time, I think my thoughts are probably similar to Michael's, in the sense that it feels like there are some more, this is a feel thing, right? I haven't quantified it, but a little bit more of an open distribution in terms of thoughts and from the model inputs, in terms of some that it feels like, hey, why not stick with this really warm pattern that we've been in? It keeps overperforming on the warm side. I think there's some data points that suggest why not. And then I do think there are some data points that suggest here that we could see a change. And one thing I'd add, other than just the MGO inputs, which Paul has talked about, I think there's also a pretty significant cold pool in Western Canada. You guys probably heard on the news about the snowstorm in Montana.
Yeah.
Well, there's a legitimate, we can look at this later when we look at the forecast, but there's a legitimate cold pool in Western Canada. And I remember Professor Torn once told me, when I asked him about what are the best antecedent conditions for a forecast bus out, say 11 to 15 days, but this could apply 16. He said, look for the region you're forecasting, is there a strong temperature gradient near either contemporary, like in the current period, or somewhere near it? And he said, if there is, that could be a sign, right? Because all that temperature gradient needs to shift a little bit. And instead of Chicago being on the warm side, Chicago's on the cold side. Instead of the forecast verifying a little bit of, above normal, it verifies well below normal. So that could be something interesting for this forecast, but it could also be something interesting for a research study to see, hey, if there's an existing strong pool, cold pool temperature gradient, are there heightened risks for significant model errors?
Yeah, I feel like that the point about the temperature gradient has been pretty important for like the last couple of weeks. It feels like basically across, I don't know, through the Midwest, it feels like there's been that strong temperature gradient for the last couple of weeks, where like the Southeast and the Northeast, basically the eastern half of the country, is incredibly warm, but then it's just cooler or really cool. And especially you can even see it on the CPC's website this week, where it's like 70% chance of being warmer than normal in the Southeast, but then it's like 50-60% chance of being cooler than normal up in the Northeast. So I think we've seen a very strong gradient over the last couple of weeks, and I don't know, that could lend itself to a bust.
Yeah. And one more thing, I know we don't have a lot of data, but to your point about how it seems like folks did better in the summer than the winter, it certainly feels that way, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It feels like the winter, certainly last winter, was harder. And I know you weren't involved as much then, but it just looking at the scores and just from a field perspective, it feels like it was harder to be, normal last year than or in the winter than summer. And that could speak to variability or maybe more variability in the pattern. It could also just be the benchmark thing. I mean, it could be coming full circle here that, in the winter we're comparing to the 30-year was very difficult to beat, right? There were only forecasters who participated 50% of the time. I think there might have been none. I don't know.
I don't think there were.
Yeah, exactly. And now in the summer, in terms of beating the 10-year, you're the closest one here who might qualify. It's going to be a photo finish. I think we've got 2 more forecasts that are going to verify this summer before we transition.
Yes.
Yeah, so 2 more. And I think Michael's actually pretty close too, but there's, it's going to be, again, very difficult to beat a different normal this time, but 10-year in the summer, 30-year in the winter.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I brought up originally, going back and looking at some of the forecasts, I saw a pattern back in the summer, those 3 forecast periods where verification was far warmer than anything that any of us put. And then there was that big bust. So I saw the 3 warmer than normal forecasts the last 3 weeks and was just curious to see if anyone thought that this week might be that bust. Again, it's a small sample size, so we really not too much we can do comparison wise, but just thought that was interesting.
There's one other thing there too with you have to be careful about recency bias. That also, what tends to happen in my view, this is more of my subjective view of how I've seen forecasters adapt, is, after you get like 3 or 4 weeks of the forecast kind of coming in a little bit hotter or a lot hotter or a little, colder, all of a sudden you kind of start to tweak you find a reason, a bias maybe to kind of go in that direction. And then I think that's part of also why sometimes you get slammed, there really isn't good reason. It's just, you feel like what I just said, like 3 weeks in a row, it's going to, why is that going to change? Well, why is it going to stay the same? You should argue too. It could just be things happen. And that's what happened. We saw that happen in July or whatever. So it's, it's almost like it feels like you're setting yourself up for a trap too, in terms of, I don't know that we're seeing it necessarily. We'll look at it here in a second, but if forecasts are starting to tweak higher a little bit because they feel like, I gotta try to capture this heat. And then all of a sudden things come in a little bit colder. It's like you get hit from both ends. You're biasing yourself without strong evidence. And then the pattern shifted and you really get hit.
Yeah. Something else I'll add in here, with the forecast being a little on the cool side the past 3 weeks, is I think part of it, at least this is from my perspective, is that when you go and do the forecast, at least this is what I do, I go and take a look at, this is where I go to look for the 10-year and the 30-year, and I also see, I go in and see industries at 24, Dr. Decker's at 25, Nat Johnson 24. Zach 24, I see all these people in the mid-20s, and that's kind of, I think a little bit, it's like, well, all these people in the 20s, it must, that's where I'll start, even if I have an idea already of where I want to be. And it influences, at least for me, it influences my forecast, because I'm not gonna go 35 if I see everyone else in the mid-20s. That doesn't, it's not really how I would think about it if I see everyone else going in this area, being an outlier without any strong signal doesn't really make any sense, because if there's a strong signal for warmer, why is everyone at 25? What did I miss?
But
kind of thing.
Michael, that works both ways, right? And not that I should be telling you, because I think your performance is better than mine, but that leads to bias too, right? Because all of a sudden, if 5 or 10 people have forecasted before, what if other people say the same thing, right? The 4th forecaster says, well, the first 3 have been kind of warm, so I better stay warm. Then the 5th person says, well, the first 4, and the 6th person, the 7th person who comes to the website, all of a sudden you create that artificial bias just because people have been looking at what other people have been doing, and now no one feels comfortable. After the 10th or 15th, if we had 20 people doing this forecast contest, the 21st person's not going to go cold because everyone ahead of them. So I think in the way that you can avoid that, right, is to try to have your own process you follow every week, a repeatable process, right? Your repeatable process. And it's not to say that you should ignore what everyone else is doing. I'm certainly not saying that. But maybe in your repeatable process, you account for how much you're going to wait on that. In other words, to make it really super simple, let's say your repeatable process every week is to put 50% of your weight on the ECMWF and 50% of the weight on the mean of everyone else, right? And then boom, then you have it and you don't have to worry about biasing yourself. Or maybe it's like, 33, your own independent thought, and that 33, you require yourself to come up with that number before you look at anyone else, and then you integrate it together. And then at that point, if you see that your number is just wildly different, I think, you have a couple choices, right? You have one and say, listen, I think my process was okay. And I'm gonna, my independent process. And so I'm gonna continue to weight at 33%. I'm gonna weight the mean 33%, my forecast 33, and the EC 33. And maybe you have some justification on that based on performance, right? And frankly, your performance has generally been better than most. The other thing is, and there's certainly no shame in this, is saying, you know what? The consensus or the mean, actually, they thought of something that I totally forgot. You know, Zach looked at some MGO thing, and I ignored that. And now that I think about it, I think actually I would adjust my number or something like that. All
Yeah,
right.
I mean, it's definitely there's definitely a lot of ways that could go. I was just saying in general that um, that could be a reason. I mean, I don't know if I'm just giving from my perspective that that's what I do. That other forecasters, if they're in kind of a clumped area within 5, that's kind of, I'll look at that and say, well, I should probably be within this range area, maybe give or take 2 or 3 on the edges. But if there's a lot of people in this area, that's probably where I should conglomerate. Um, but yeah, no, you definitely, that's a good point that um, I should look at more than just what their forecasts are, and maybe even um, look at consensus as part of my forecast, since I think consensus actually is doing pretty well. Yeah,
Yeah,
11.6.
I
That's
think
pretty
it's
good.
still number one.
One other thing I wanted to add, though, and this was more for the winter season, um, I'd say that some of the problems with forecasting come from a lack of experience with how to do this. Because I know at least I wasn't, I was new to this. I'm sure a lot of other people were, but I can't speak to for them. I don't know. But a lot of people were new. We had the craziness with the polar vortex disruption, all that stuff, and the EC going off the rails with record-breaking cold. So it was definitely a tough forecast for
Was
those winter months.
is Zach? Before we switch gears, could you just sort that by consensus? I just want to see. If I remember right. Is anyone? Okay, so Zach, you're um, the closest. Is anyone else who's
Philip is there.
Philip? Philip is there.
And Mike.
The consensus. Yep.
You are.
I guess I am now. That's interesting. Yeah, consensus has fallen off a little bit in the last couple weeks because I was not beating consensus, and according to this, I am now. Right, and
Well, yeah.
Zach,
The other thing too is that, especially with this last 3-week period, I mean, I remember my bias was I was going slightly warm. Now I'm minus 2.9. So period is a little bit tough
yeah,
for all of us. I mean, I think there's a lot of like under the radar effects that it's having on all of our performances. Even though we're having all these positive scores, the fact that all of us keep going way too cool these last 3 weeks, I think is starting to affect us more than we realize.
yep, cool.
Does anyone else on this forecast attribution topic, anyone else want to bring anything up, or should we move on?
I'm good.
All right. So we can talk about this this forecast for today. I will start and talk about mine. So, I mean, I basically joined right at the beginning of the cooling season, so I haven't done the heating season yet. I've only heard about how it went last winter and how basically the 30-year normal was the one to beat, and it was tough to be better than it. Um, and then keeping in mind the fact that, again, I brought it up just a little while ago about um, not sure if this is a transition period or not. I was a bit unsure about how to do my forecast this week. I did adjust my formula quite a bit from the summer, but basically, I just to experiment to see what I could come up with, and basically did an even weighting between the 10-year normal and the 30-year normal. basically I factored in the best performer, consistent best performer from the summer and the consistent best performer from the winter, and just got a number of 46.5. And like I said, my confidence, I never really changed my spread, because I'm never really sure when to feel confident about a forecast or not, so I just keep it at normal. But basically, I just had a blend of the two best performers so far, and we'll see what happens. My guess is as we move forward farther into the heating season, I will start putting less weight on the 10-year and more on the 30-year, just based on how last winter went. But yeah, so it was my first forecast for the heating season. I was a little bit unsure about how to do it, so I just experimented a little bit, and that's what I got. Who'd like to go next?
I guess I could go. So my forecast was for 41.2, with my same weighting I've had for a while, mostly teleconnections with some CPC and 10 years sprinkled in.
Michael, do you want to share your screen, or are you good?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, if you want, yeah.
All right, stop.
Okay. Okay, so I guess I'll start with this. So, like I said, the CPC shows quite a bit of warmth. But I didn't actually factor this in too much since I just kind of, if you imagine, I just kind of drew a line through the middle of the country, and anything south of that I really didn't consider for an HDD forecast since I don't believe that that would even be much of a factor until at the earliest maybe late November. If memory serves correct, maybe it doesn't, but definitely not in mid-October do I think that anything in the south will be affecting HDD production. There is a little bit of warmth spreading into parts of the central and northeastern part of the country, but that's only 55% chance. I'm not particularly impressed with that, although there is I don't want to say a steep gradient, but it's, that 60% is pretty close, but I think that'll stay mostly in the Mid-Atlantic region where it has for most of the summer. Didn't really see anything too strong from the teleconnection standpoint. The NAO seems to be around the neutral area, although that could change considering recently we've been verifying on the lower end of the spread. So I don't know if this could be one of those cases where the NAO it's negative, we get that Greenland block, and we just kind of hold it forever like we did the past few months or so. AO seems to be neutral, so no strong signal there. And the PNA, we'll see if this straight line drop happens, although I have my doubts that it'll just go straight down. Doesn't really. The GFS seems to be a little bit little wacky there, we'll say, but does seem to be heading back towards more of a neutral look, so that could relax the pattern a little bit as well. So I didn't really see anything strong with that, kind of like a zonal flow going around, with some cooler air to the north, some warmer air to the south, roughly landing at 41.2. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, I think just he's not here, but I'll bring it up because he made a similar point that you did, Mike. Dr. Decker consistently forecasts based on what the CPC output looks like, and he had a similar point. I was reading a strategy earlier that the the areas with the strongest above normal risk or where there's no HDDs would be expected anyway. So, I mean, he seemed to have a pretty similar idea to you, where, just because there's all that warmth in the southeastern part of the country, that's not really in an HDD area anyway. So, what you put a 41, and I think he put a 41.5. So you two had pretty similar forecasts.
Yeah, hopefully we're both right on that.
Let's hope. Dave, you want to
Oh, okay.
finish us off?
Yeah, let me see. Can I share my screen?
Yep.
And, all right. And then we could also, if you guys want, we can also take a quick look at Radiant, or I'm sorry, Maxar after this too, and just see what they were. I can pull that up.
Sure.
All right, so let's see if I can pull up my forecast here. Make sure I got the right week. Yeah, this is me. No, this is not it. Sorry, computer delay. There we go. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so I think I alluded to this just a little bit earlier, but my formula did undergo some changes. I'm starting to shift out of summer mode into winter mode, and I'm kind of feeling this through. Right, I don't have any kind of firm analytics to say exactly how I should do this, but I'm shifting away from like the 10-year normal toward the 30-year normal. And my plan, my expectation anyway, is that each week I'll kind of shift a little bit more until we get to like by the end of November, and then I'll be full into whatever my winter sort of kind of numbers are, with presumably some evolution based on how some of the short-term metrics are performing and any other new model inputs we add. But so for this week, a little less on the 10-year than I've done in the past, a little bit more on the 30-year. A little less on the trend, a little bit more on the ECMWF. By the way, in terms of a little bit more weighting on the ECMWF, that was twofold. One, the idea again that the EC may do a little bit better in the winter than the summer, and also the fact that over the last few weeks the ECMWF has done a little bit better again. So based on that, I put a little bit more. I think last week I had like 10%, so this week 20%. I continue to weight the CFS at 0. For reasons that we've already discussed. And I continue to put, this will eventually go away, but this is my hackish formula to try another sort of climate change formula to put 10% of my weight on the top 10 years for this period. And so that all boiled down to these numbers that you see here, the 39.9. I should say the uncertainty value of 13.7, that's slightly higher than normal. And the reason I did that, let me see if I can pull it up. It's not the one I was looking for. Yeah, this one. So we talked about this earlier, but you can see this is about a week composite of surface temperatures, and you can see there is a very good cold pool there across Western Canada. And as we just talked about, I think you can make a case here that just with a relatively normal, let alone a big change in the jet stream, but just a normal change in the jet stream, normal error, I should say, could create a higher than normal error in terms of surface temperatures because of that sharp gradient. So instead of having air that might be 10-degree difference in a certain amount of space, maybe it's 30 or 40 degrees. Again, if that comes through Chicago and some of the key areas of the demand region, we could have big differences. So that was how I tried to account for that, by increasing my uncertainty a little bit. Outside of that, I just, we pointed to some of these, or I pointed to some of these in the video I made earlier, but we've got some great input here from Paul Roundy and his group there in terms of some of these forecast tools. Definitely recommend taking a look at them. The bottom line here, I think Mike may have alluded to this earlier, Paul's statistical MJO tool is showing a shift to a colder pattern here as you get toward our forecast window, October 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th. I won't go through this whole thing, but you do see the transition early on from kind of a warmer pattern to a cooler pattern here. And during that, it does seem to show progression of the MJO. The reason I think why you can't just ignore this is because we know that the dynamic guidance historically does not resolve the MJO that well. And so that's why forecasters like Paul and research/forecasters do rely, or at least do put some weight on statistical tools. And so this statistical tool is clearly showing a faster evolution of the MJO into some of the colder phases and potential for change. So certainly I think it's something to watch, and it'll be interesting to see how this period comes forward. Does it come forward more like Paul's statistical tool, or does it come forward like some of the other guidance we're seeing, such as, here's the dynamic guidance that still shows things being pretty warm. At the end of the day, in terms of my personal view, I did not see a clear signal in the MGO guidance to skew things warmer or colder. And so I just kept the formula as is, and again, just tweaked the sigma value a little bit. That's basically my 2 cents. Any questions there before we move on to Maxar? All right, well, why don't we take a look at Maxar here? I'm going to pull up their report. Again, we appreciate Maxar providing all this information. So this is Maxar's 16 to 20-day forecast. You got the map on the left. You can see it definitely looks pretty warm. And the number was down here, 34, well, basically 35, almost 35 HDDs. You can see the 30 and 10-year normal. So obviously their forecast is also on the warmer side of the distribution. Let's just look at their forecast reason. And I didn't have a chance to look at this in great detail here, so we can all look at it kind of together. So no major changes. Obviously, they've had a pretty warm forecast. As we've talked about in the past, the GLAM is the angular momentum, global angular momentum. So they tend to put, they mention this usually every week. So they use that as an important input into their forecast. Kind of keeping the pattern warm. The WPO and the PNA are kind of warm characteristics, like they say here. What else? Significantly lower than the 10-30 year. We talked about that. ECM WF being a close fit. CFS, on the other hand, falls between the 10 and 30 year, but has mostly been cool bias of late. I think that's a very fair comment to say it's been cool bias. Forecast risk. A element of pattern persistence could result in cooler variability versus forecast along the northern tier. Not 100%. Does anyone know exactly how to interpret that?
My guess would be that they're saying since it's cool now, if the pattern continues to persist, then it could remain cooler or cool in general, rather than being like Minnesota being, instead of what does that say, 3 to 5 or whatever, it could be only 1 to 2, or maybe even normal or below average or something. That's my guess to it.
No, that makes sense. So let's pull up. This is here's the one. Well, let me pull up the ESA is probably better model. Yeah, so you can see the snowstorm and whatnot. So I think you're exactly right. If this 1 to 5 per se, some of these areas, even though there's not a lot of people who live up here and not a lot of gas, it's maybe just enough to nudge the numbers. 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15. Actually, let's look explicitly at the numbers. It can't hurt to do this. I was looking at this earlier. So these are, there's a lot here, but these are HDDs. It's like a strip starting from October 1st down. Maxar is this column, and you can see it's color coded. So, and actually, if you can just go to the 1 to 5 day composite here. So the 1 to 5 day composite's 24.8. And then over here, they give you the relative number. Sorry, let me see what we're looking at. We're looking at compared to, I guess we could look at, we're looking compared to the 10-year right now. Up here, it says 10-year or 30-year. So we'll just keep it on the 10-year for now. Just keep it straightforward. So again, they're forecasting 24.8. And yeah, that's slightly, we're in HDDs now, so higher is cooler. So that's slightly higher than the 10-year for the 1 to 5. And then looking at 6 to 10, they are slightly lower, so slightly warmer. And then for the 11 to 15, they're a good chunk warmer. And the EC ensembles is right over here, the 27.0. The EC ensemble is obviously quite a bit. So yeah, I think you're 100% right. That's what they're saying there, if that pattern persists. And the second risk, just, tropical systems can alter things.
Yeah, something else I'm kind of noticing here is looking at the EC forecast right there. That's a lot of broad warmth of only 1 to 2 degrees. So that either means, to me anyway, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, that seems to me like there'd be some type of pattern shift, or at least some kind of like event where it's warm on one side and then the cool starts to swing through and cool everything down, because it doesn't really make sense from a pattern perspective to have the whole country be 1 to 2 degrees above average. Like I don't see what kind of pattern would result in that kind of output for temperatures. Um, so that I think either the Euro is um, just really having a poor time handling a zonal pattern, or there's some type of uh, big cold or warm event somewhere in the forecast period that's gonna affect a lot of this, either warmth or lack thereof.
I think that's a good point. I think that's probably the case a lot of times, although again, it would be interesting to study that. The fact that, because of, ensemble blending and, just kind of watering down, you typically don't see the kind of anomalies in the long-term forecast guidance that actually verifies, right? It tends to, well, get watered down, right? You get a lot of, just cold ensemble members uh, offsetting warm ensemble members, and it's really hard to capture the anomaly. And that, if you what some forecasters I know, if they feel like if they have good confidence directionally, they'll sometimes use that as justification to go with a much more anomalous forecast than one of the models is saying. In other words, hey, the ECMWF, it's going to be warm. It's just watering down the warmth. And so then, my forecast is going to show a lot more, warm anomalies or more warm anomalies than is currently projected. But where that gets tricky too, though, is timing, right? Because there could also be just a 5-day synoptic, like a slightly cooler pattern, and that could really, as we know, that could really screw up things too, just the timing of those events.
Yeah.
I do think that's, so I just take a look at the, for this week, the distribution of forecasts. It is interesting. So we've got Paul at the top, coldest at 60. The MGO analog, interestingly, is also pretty cool. And we got a lot of 40s. And then interesting that the EC is the warmest forecast here.
Again, just as
Yeah.
like a pattern recognition, last time on that 7-9 forecast, it was warm, 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 and then the EC stayed warm.
It
and then
did.
It went way too cool.
It did.
So I mean, who
Broken
knows?
record. It
Who
could be a
knows?
broken record. Yeah.
Who knows?
Another possibility with their with the forecast is, well, if I think you said the map they had was ensembles,
Yeah.
and it's washing it out. Well, what if it's also possible that there's, say, 40% or super warm, or maybe even 20% even, or like super warm, like 6, 7, 8 degrees above the average. But then the other 80%, they're somewhere like a -2. So it's we don't know the exact weighting, because if that's the case, I mean, would you go with the super warm that's only 20%, or if the other 80% are averaging out to only be slightly warm? I mean, obviously they probably, if that was the case, they would have looked at that and probably wouldn't have gone as warm. But I'm just saying, it's like, what if most of them are actually cool, and it's just happens to be that there's a lot of warm, super warm members that are skewing it towards the warm side.
Yeah. And I think Zach, your point's a really good one too. Again, short-term memory can really kill us, because although the EC is doing better, right? There was a period there where it's doing better in the summer too, and it looked like maybe it was turning a corner. And then, like you said, we had that forecast bust, and then, right, there's a case there that the ECMWF really struggles, especially during pattern transitions, as basically what you've been saying. So, yeah, that 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 is an argument not to do, maybe what Maxar is doing this week, which is, it seems to be very closely aligned to the ECMWF. It feels like that's right. It feels like that's right, but is it really right to go so far away? Yeah, also so far away from. I mean, obviously we've got our 30-year up here, but even the 10-year is 44, and we've talked about how well the 10-year has done this summer, especially as compared to like the ECMWF. So this will be an interesting one to see how it kind of comes forward.
And we have Maxar coming next week, so we can easily ask them about their methodology for this week.
Yep.
We obviously have talked about the potential that it's a tough week.
Yeah.
So we can always ask them next week.
Yep. This will be a good test also for the ECMWF. I guess the real good test will be eventually the pattern will change, right? And will the dynamic guidance capture that change well, or will they lag behind? And I forgot to, we won't show it now, but we had that great graphic from Luke, who showed also what you mentioned, certainly this summer, how during the pattern changes, that I think we noted 3 major pattern changes in our discussion last week. There's, I think, one in June, July, and then this one that we've been, the one that got us to this record-born pattern.
Yeah.
And all 3, the models did, but the EC in particular just did not handle well. So that's all I had on my end. Let me give it back to you.
What do we have for time?
Just a few minutes. See if Mike.
Yeah, Mike, do you want to talk about your research for a couple minutes?
Yeah, sure. I'll share my screen for it. Okay, gotta make sure I was doing the right thing. Okay. So, I don't know if I've shown any of these changes or not, so I'll just go through them real quick again. So I cleaned things up a little bit, and you can see there's a lot less noise going around. Not so much text as there always has been, but something I was trying to add for a couple of weeks, maybe it was like only a week, I don't remember. I added in comments instead of the actual, the explanations. So now the explanations, you just hover over. So like say you want to know, like you're looking through this and you're like, oh, what's the 10-year plus normal plus euro blend? And it tells you 75% 10-year plus 25% euro. I could maybe get a little more in depth than that. If you guys think I need it, but they're all generally like that. I didn't do anything for industry, but I put all the explanations in the actual thing so that it's not cluttered everywhere. And if anyone has a question on what it is, it's they can just hover over it and they can see that. Maybe I should list it somewhere that's where the explanations are given, but so that's in there. Add in the explanations where I thought they were necessary. Again, I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but I added number of best forecasts by error. Red is the lowest. Obviously, the euro has never had a best forecast, which honestly, going back through May 7th through, I'm going to include the 10th, even though I didn't put that in yet. That's kind of telling, considering how many forecasts there have been, that it's never been the best. So that's my 2 cents on that. Yellow is middle of the road. Industry has only had 2 best forecasts, which again, all things considered, I think that's a little bit telling. That they have never. In my opinion, I think they should be a little bit better than that, but that's something for debate, I think. Most of the forecasts that have done the best are the flat bias error, which, flat bias correction. So 7 CDDs just added to the normal euro forecast. That has actually done fairly well as compared to the euro and all the other inputs as well. The blend error of the 10-year in euro has done very well, which makes sense considering the 10-year has been our best and most consistent forecaster, or non-human forecaster anyway. And the reverse bias error has actually surprisingly had 3 very good forecasts, which obviously is not really something you want to be shooting for, um, since it only really caught those super warm periods. So obviously not this isn't exactly indicative of overall being the best, but it is that's what I went with. Obviously the blend error, just going with the eyeball test doesn't always outperform the euro, but compared to the regular just bias error. But
Hey,
so
Mike,
that's that. What's up?
can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, go for it.
Can we just take a quick step back and can you give us the elevator pitch about the process here, or the methodology? So how is this correction constructed? Is it like a 30-day bias correction, like 60, or how is it?
You mean how I got the bias correction? Just this one?
Yeah, let's just focus on one very specific example here, or data stream. So yeah, because it's yeah. So euro, is that what we're looking at? Like,
Yeah,
so you have your raw euro presumably, right? And then you have some
yeah.
bias corrected euro. And just take us through, just as quickly as you can, how you go take that raw data and bias correct it.
So essentially, using this one, so I took the bias correction for this particular one was minus 4.8 CDDs, so adding 4.8 CDDs to the forecast, which was the bias that the euro had back in July, taken from the forecast contest. Um, and the basic gist of what happens is I take the euro number, which I also get from the forecast contest, and simply just add 4.8 to the number, and that's where I come up with it. The error then is calculated simply as the sum of the two. Why does that look weird? The sum of d6 minus e6, which is oops. um, so essentially, the verification minus whatever the number is given by the bias correction, and I also have the same for the euro, same formula. And then, that's essentially it. There's also I included MAPE for the first two, mean absolute percent error, which there's a explanation for as to what that is. And you can see, based on the overall errors, the average errors for both of, just going off of the euro normal and bias and the MAPEs, there's a clear improvement in overall score, and ignoring the negative, since 0 isn't exactly technically a benchmark, since negative and positive it doesn't really matter. But there is an improvement of about 1.6, if my math is correct, just by giving a simple bias correction to the euro. So even though it's not accurate 100% of the time, like it's not going to be better 100% of the time, as you can see, because there are times where it misses, especially if the euro busts on the cooler or warmer side. Um, but there is definitely some extra skill to be added to the Euro forecast just by simply adding a simple bias correction.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah,
First, if you don't mind, let's continue just with process, and we'll talk about the results in a second. So okay, so I think I understand. So again, process methodology, right? That's just our focus. And the reason I stress this, right, is because we want to understand the process methodology, because otherwise the results, they don't mean that much, right? You want to understand how you got that. So and I think you're telling me that in terms of the methodology for this, you took the bias that occurred in July and then applied it to each forecast subsequently, through the remainder of the summer. And then you compared errors, right? Then you had a bias
yeah,
version, and that's what you just started to go through. Like, here are the results. Does that sound right so far?
yeah. And if you want me to you want me to just kind of go through how I arrived at each
Well, Here,
different
here's what I think,
bias.
and
Yeah.
part of this is just for time, but we could also talk about this offline. I think the best thing to do, again, remember, you want someone to be able to get that answer without having to ask you a question. Remember, we kind of said, imagine someone's seeing this for the first time. You want them to know exactly what's going on without you having to tell them. So what seems to me is like, it would be great, and this could literally be a line like what you just told me. You could have a separate tab or whatever, where you describe the method, or methodology for each of those inputs. So, for example, you might have 4 bias corrected ECs. It looks like you had a few of them, and one might be, I'm just making this stuff up, but hey, this is a 30-day running bias correction, i.e., it takes the last 30 days of data and always applies it. Or hey, this is a July bias. This input 2. That's a July bias correction. It took the bias from July and applied it to subsequent forecast. Here's input 3. So then you could literally, it might be one line for each of those, and it might be 10 words, whatever it takes. You want to be as pithy as possible. But then someone can say, okay, Mike's got 4 different bias correction methods. Here's how the methodology for each 4. Now let me go and look at the results. Now let me go and see how each of these results kind of panned out. So that's just one sort of suggestion, sort of idea. Let me stop there. How does that sound so far? And how consistent is that with what you have?
So, in other words, you're saying I should have something along the lines of like a methodology page, where I have inputs 1 through whatever, say 8. I don't know how many there are. Where I just have input 1, blah blah blah, input 2, blah blah blah, input 3, blah blah blah, and explain what each one, how I came to uh, making that bias correction, and I guess how it's performed, and the whole 9 yards
Yeah,
essentially.
performance is secondary. Don't even worry about. I would say at this moment, I know that's the fun part, right? And I know that's the sexy part, right? But for now, I don't even care. Like, and I think this is how most research scientists are going to look at this. I don't care about the results for the moment. I don't care about performance. I want to know your methodology, right? Because if I don't know your methodology, if I don't know how this thing works, I'm not going to care about your results, right? I'm going to be like, how do whatever, how do you.
Yeah. I understand what you mean. Yeah.
So the first thing is you want to make clear as possible is here's the methods, right? Here's the method. So just making sure that that's nailed down and that someone can see this, because that's the best way someone's going to be able to, and myself included, is going to be able to provide feedback. If I can at least know what you did, and then I could say, okay, yeah, that makes great sense the way he did it. And then you're going to show me the results, and the results may be, better than the ECRL. They may be worse. And then we're going to, of course, absolutely, the next step is for you to interpret the results and provide your own conclusions and say, here's why I think they're better, here's why I think they're worse, and then so on and so forth. And we have a group discussion about that. We talk about ideas for improvements, right? And you kind of just go through that cycle and stuff like that. But now you might have that. You might have the methodology in the comments, or that thing you showed me at first, the tooltip kind of thing, and or that is good what's in the tooltip. But yeah, if you don't have it, and even if it is in the tooltip, I think the bottom line is somewhere in a separate tab or on the sheet, just maybe starting column or row 25 or whatever, but you just want to say, here's the methodology for each bias correction method. That's all. And it might take you 3 minutes, but just so that the user knows, and then the user can A, understand, B, provide feedback in terms of, I think that's a smart way to do it, or a good way, or here's an idea for an improvement.
Yeah, I can definitely add a methodology page. I think I can get that. I'll try to get it done around Thursday, by Thursday, because I have some other stuff I need to do.
I really think that's going to be the best way for me to help you, and for all of us, because until then, you're showing me results, but again, it's hard for me to know why the results there, if they make sense, are they good or bad, if I don't know the methodology.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll try to get that done, either tomorrow, today, if I have some time, or definitely it'll be done by Thursday. And then I'll shoot you an email. I'll say, hey, I finished the stuff, And then if you have some time, you can check it out and shoot me an email or give me a call or whatever you want to do with it.
Okay. Okay. And and don't worry if the results don't look, quote unquote good, i.e., hey, it improves. That's normal, right? And if that is the case, that's the case, right? A lot of research, right? What do they say? 90% of research is, the results aren't value add, right? It's a dead end. It's not a better forecast. Doesn't mean it's wrong at all. And it doesn't mean that it's not helpful. In fact, again, a lot of the questions we ask here about, hey, how does the EC do during pattern changes? Or, hey, is there a better bias correction? What the worst thing is not knowing. Like, I can't wait till we get some firm results here, because then we'll be able to answer the question. I don't care which answer it is, but whether an EC bias correction helps. And if it doesn't, at least we'll know. We'll be able to say, guess what, guys? I wouldn't bother with bias correction, because Michael and others have looked into this, and the results aren't any better than a raw, or at least it's inconclusive. It's in the noise kind of thing. So that's really
Yeah.
helpful. That is an extremely helpful result and conclusion, even if it's not super sexy, so to speak.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't mean to impede. I just wanted to make sure we got, I was able to provide that feedback. If you'd still like to go through a couple things, happy to do that. Or if you think it's better, we can kind of hit it next time.
I mean, it's we're a little bit over on the time. The only other thing I'll just toss in here is I did add the preface and works in progress summary page. Um, you know, gave a little bit of a purpose and other stuff. That was really it. The only other thing is, I guess that put in works in progress. Yeah. So, my current thinking, and this still stands, is to use 3 normally cooler averages, and 3 normally warmer averages. So I was thinking, you have 30-year, and 2 others that I'd have to figure out, and that's kind of, it's kind of hard to find cooler than normal, and considering what normal it even is. But cooler averages. It's going to be a little more difficult to find those. And then 3 warmer averages, like 10-year, top 10 warmest, and then some other third. Or maybe I'll only go with 2. It depends on how hard it is to actually find these numbers. And then essentially figure out some type of um, formula or something or program that let's say we have top 10 warmest forecast. It shows 50 CDDs or HDDs, doesn't really matter. We'll say HDDs since we're in the HDD season. It shows 50 HDDs, and the Euro forecast is 55. So if it's showing that warm of a forecast, the bias correction will see that, and they'll think, okay, it's way too warm, and it'll pull it back. And of course, there's problems with this. Which is kind of what I've been trying to work out is, well, what if the Euro is actually correct in that instance, and it is going to be warmer than the top 10 warmest? And that's kind of where I'm at with the problem portion. I could see it working much better with the cooler portions, because it's really often not that cool anymore. But I could see it being a problem in certain instances that way as well.
Okay. I think those are some good research questions to get to. And I would say let's take it one step at a time, right? Let's solve the problem for one input, like the ECMWF, which is where we started. Let's see if we can get something good there, and then I think we can expand on that, and we can have more conversations. And they're not easy questions to answer, right? I mean, they're, unfortunately, right? If they were, we'd know what to do in this situation.
Yeah.
But and for what it's worth, I'll just leave you with and not that this has to be the first thing you do or whatever, but the question that I would love answered more than any other for really, I guess, at least through the cooling season, we could go back further, is like a simple 30-day bias correction, a moving 30-day bias correction. How would that perform? How did that perform versus just the raw EC? If we had just used a 30-day that was moving, so each forecaster would look back over the last 30 days and say, what was the bias for the last 30 days? Apply that to the current forecast, and then look at the verification.
I think I do have a forecast input like that.
Okay, let's so that maybe that's something we could hit next time. But to me, because I think that the reason why that stands out to me is because I think that's a market standard. I mean, some folks might look at 45 and some folks might look a little less, and there might be some dynamic. But having a 30-day would be, I think, really interesting in terms of bringing some new value to the forecast contest. And then again, we can expand on that. But once we have a baseline, we can expand on that. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'm just kind of eyeballing this, and it doesn't seem to have done all that particularly well, just from an eyeball perspective.
Yeah. Okay. No, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, but yeah, that's something, yeah, we can follow up on in the next couple of weeks. So,
Yeah, sounds good.
or I'll turn it back to Zach here.
And we're about 12 minutes over, so unless anyone has anything urgent, great discussion today. I think we covered a lot of interesting stuff, and we'll see you all next week, and we'll have Maxar as our industry guest. So looking forward to that. Hope everyone has a nice rest of their day, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
All right, we'll see ya.
See ya.